Hello my sweet bestie angels, welcome back. Today we're going to be talking about all of my 5-star reads from 2024. In 2024 I read I think 152 books and I had 13 5-star reads. I was originally going to do my top 10 books of 2024, but I just wanted to include all of my 5-star reads. Also, some of these weren't initially rated 5 stars, some of them were like a 4.5, and then the more I dwelled on them and thought about them, they became 5-star reads. So we have 13 books to talk about today. I've also put all of these books in order, so we're going to work from number 13 down to number 1. Obviously all of these books are favorites of mine, they wouldn't be in this video if they weren't, but of course I have my favorites. But anyway, let's get into it. In 13th place we have The Very Secret Society of Irregular Witches. This book is so wholesome, it is so cozy, it is so sweet. I feel like it truly just warmed my heart. I could feel my heart just bubbling with joy and happiness because it was just such a sweet story. In this story, witches kind of have to keep themselves a secret, they can't let other people know that they're witches. And we have this one specific witch, I don't know if her name is Mika or Micah, my apologies, and she is just feeling a little bit lonely, a little bit isolated, and she gets this opportunity to come and work as a tutor at this kind of like an orphanage or a foster home. And she turns up there and they say, we know you're a witch and we want you to teach these 3 girls who are in the orphanage how to be witches, because they are also witches, but we are not witches, so we can't teach them all the things they need to know. We can't teach them how to harness their power, so we want you to do that. And so that is what she is doing. But along the way there is just so much found family, and also she may or may not fall in love. It is just the sweetest, most wholesome story. If you love found family, you absolutely need to read this, and I feel like this could be a bit of a comfort read for me that I'll go back to again and again because it was just too sweet. Coming in at number 12 we have Firefly Lane by Kristen Hanna. This was my first Kristen Hanna book, and what a way to start off my Kristen Hanna journey. I don't even know how to describe it because I guess at the core of it, it's really just a book about growing older and female friendships. That's kind of the core of it. I feel like when you explain it, it really doesn't sound like anything special, and it kind of isn't. It's a very mundane story about these 2 girls who meet as teenagers, and then you just follow them for the rest of their lives through the ups, through the downs, through times when they are really good friends and other times when they're not such good friends, and how people can have different priorities. And it's just really fascinating. I feel like it's such a character study, and they make some really frustrating decisions at times as well. I feel like I was screaming into my Kindle because I read it on my Kindle. Why are you doing that? Why aren't you doing this? Why aren't you doing that? But I feel like it's a very realistic look at what friendship can be like and what life can be like. But I feel like this is just a very raw and realistic look at life and at friendship, and it just felt so incredibly real. And at the end I absolutely sobbed. I was shocked at how attached I got to this book. I was not expecting to do that, and even whilst I was reading I didn't think I was that attached, and then at the end I started bawling my eyes out. I just feel like it's one of those books where you'll never be able to explain exactly how it feels to read it. And there are a lot of books like that. I feel like Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow is one of those books where it's if I describe what it's about, you'll be okay, it doesn't sound that interesting to me, but then you start reading it and it's just the feeling that you get whilst reading, because the premise or the synopsis just doesn't give what I wish it gave, you know? I'm finding it really hard to take myself seriously in this outfit, but I've committed. Moving down to number 11, Summer Romance by Annabelle Monaghan. This was such a good read. This is very Emily Henry-esque, I would say. Very much it's a romance book, but it's also very much a women's fiction kind of story. This book is about a mother who has recently separated from her husband, and up until this point her whole life has just kind of been being a wife and being a mum, and now she finds herself in this position where she has a little bit more time, a little bit more freedom, and she also just realizes that she has lived her entire life for other people and she is so sick of living her life that way. So she kind of, I guess, takes her power back a bit. I feel like that is essentially what this book is about. It's about this woman who is taking her power back, and it is so empowering to read about a woman just being actually, I'm not gonna let people walk all over me. I'm actually gonna stand up for myself when I need to, and I'm actually not going to let people just disrespect me all the time. Such simple things, but watching her do it is just so beautiful. And then at the same time she also meets this guy and there is a summer romance, and it's just kind of this idea of is this just a summer fling or is it something a bit more serious? And obviously they have to kind of figure that out. I just loved it, and I definitely want to reread this one as well. It is incredible. I feel like all of these books I would definitely reread. Moving into number 10, we're in the top 10 now. Kind of controversial, but a novel love story. I feel like a lot of people didn't love this one, but I absolutely adored it. This is the same author as The 7 Year Slip, as The Dead Romantics. This is her newest release, came out this year, and it is just such a fascinating premise. In this book, we are following Eileen as she is making her way to like an annual book club holiday, I guess, and she is on this road trip, but then due to the circumstances, she ends up having to pull into this small town along the way. And at first she kind of doesn't think much of it, but as she spends a little bit more time, she kind of starts to realize this is really reminiscent of my favorite book. Like, this town is so similar to the setting of my favorite romance series. Lo and behold, she has found herself literally inside the setting of her favorite book series. So it's a bit of like a magical realism kind of situation. I'm pretty sure all of Ashley Poston's books are kind of a bit like that. They all have like almost like a tiny little element of magic, and that is kind of the element of magic that this one has. She has found herself in this town that is technically fictional, but now she is like living in it. And she's also just going through a rough time in her personal life, so now she's in this really happy place with these characters that she feels like she kind of knows, except there's one character who she doesn't really recognize, and it is this grumpy guy who owns the bookstore, and they end up spending a bit more time together, and there's honestly a lot more that unravels about this story, and a lot more that you come to find out about this town and these characters and this guy, and also our main character's story as well. Again, it's kind of one of those books where it's like, it's a romance, but it's also very much like a women's fiction story as well. And I feel like I've had a lot of people say they love the premise of this, but the romance didn't really hit for them. And I honestly completely understand. Like, I don't think the romance was actually the thing that like stood out to me or like made me fall in love with this book. I honestly think the premise and just like our main character's storyline and her kind of self-development and soul searching, I guess, was really what made me fall in love. And also just like the quirkiness of the town, and like I could just see every scene play out in my head. And at the end of the day, I only give 5 stars to books that just give me a 5-star feeling, and this book just gave me the 5-star feeling. Like, I know the romance isn't the best romance I've ever read in my life, but for some reason I just fell in love with it. I just felt so consumed by the story and so a part of this world that I couldn't help but fall in love with it. So again, I know that this is not everyone's favorite, and it's not one that I like go out of my way to recommend to everyone, because it doesn't seem like everyone is as obsessed as me, but for me, this was just an absolutely wonderful reading experience, and again, 100% would reread this. Next up on the list, we have one that started off as a 4.5, but then got bumped up to a 5-star read because I could not stop thinking about it, and it is Little Women. This is the ultimate cozy read. The ultimate wholesome, sweet, it's not really found family because they're actually sisters, so it's just like real family, not found family, but like gives that same feeling as found family. It's such an interesting situation because nothing crazy happens in this book, really. Like, for the most part, it is completely mundane. If you don't know the storyline, it is about 4 sisters who have grown up in a fairly poor family. Like, they're not like the poorest of poor, but they're definitely not wealthy. And it's set during the Civil War, so their father is away at the war, so it's just their mum and then these 4 girls, these 4 sisters. And when you start the book, they are quite young, and you really just follow them through many years of their lives, and you kind of just see how these 4 girls' lives unravel. And it is fascinating because they all just have such different priorities and dreams. It's actually really beautiful to watch 4 different girls live quite different lives, and just, yeah, like seeing the decisions they make and then how those decisions really form their lives. And it's interesting to me as well because I feel like so many people talk about this book and they're like, Joe and Laurie, blah blah blah, and I'm like, okay, but like there's so much more to this story than Joe and Laurie. I loved Laurie, but I preferred him as just a friend. It's not like high stakes. It's not like the craziest plot. It is very much like you are following them along their day-to-day lives. Like, there are some more interesting things that happen, like traveling and getting married and things like that, but for the most part you are really following their like day-to-day, quite mundane life, and just like how they maybe romanticize it a little bit and how they just find the joy in the day-to-day life that they live as very like ordinary girls. And I just loved it. I fell in love with all of the girls in different ways, and I felt like all of their stories felt so important. and it was just so nice to see different women have different priorities and goals, and all of them being seen, well, maybe they weren't all seen as important, but as the reader it feels like the author is trying to show the importance of women just living different lives and having different priorities. And if you want to be career focused, that's important and respectable, but also if you want to be a wife and a mother, that's also important and respectable. Like, I really love that. So this was definitely a favorite of mine this year, and I did not expect that at all. Next on the list is the only book that I don't have the physical copy of, and that is Out on a Limb by Hannah Bonham Young. I have pre-ordered it, but it's just been traditionally published in Australia, or it's about to be traditionally published in Australia, so I'm still like waiting for my copy to arrive. But I read it on my Kindle and just absolutely loved it. This is a romance book that is an unexpected pregnancy story, which is fascinating because I would not have expected that to make it onto one of my favorites for 2024, but it did. But this book follows Win and Bo. They meet at a Halloween party, they end up having a one-night stand, and then they go their separate ways. They obviously like had instant chemistry, but they never were like intending to date or be anything serious or something like that. However, Win gets pregnant from that one-night stand, so obviously she reaches out to Bo and lets him know what has happened, and you're basically just following this story as they try to navigate this new chapter of their lives where I guess they're gonna be like co-parenting, but they never even were in a relationship to begin with. So like, what does this kind of relationship look like? But it is so much more than that. Like, if you love acts of service, you need to read this book because it is just so sweet. Like, the guy in the story, Bo, he is just so incredibly sweet. I absolutely adored him. He was a bit like geeky, which I really liked. I feel like we don't get that often in books, and I've found that the more I read books where it's a guy who's a bit more like geeky, you know, he's not like this huge football player, whatever, like I really enjoy those. I think I just really like a golden retriever man, and I guess Bo is a golden retriever man. Like, I want to like tell you what he did in this book, but I don't want to ruin it, and I like think it's fun for you to like go in and just like figure it out for yourself. But it's just really sweet because, as you may assume, they end up falling in love, but it's obviously just like such an unlikely and odd journey to get to that point. But they also truly become like best friends. So by the time they fall in love, they have this really great foundation of friendship. And again, obviously it was a very unusual journey to get there, but they end up just being one of those couples where you just like know that if they were real, they would be in love forever. I just adored this story. There's also a lot more to this story apart from just a normal romance. Like, there's discussions about disabilities and other things along those lines, which was actually really fascinating, and I really enjoyed that aspect of the story as well. Moving on, we have This is The Final Empire by Brandon Sanderson. This is the first book in the Mistborn series. Have I since continued this series? No. Which is crazy. Like, that is actually crazy of me to not continue it after giving the first book in the series 5 stars. Mark my words, I will finish the Mistborn, at least like the original trilogy, this year. How do I even describe what this book is about? I guess essentially it's a book where in this world the bad guy has won. The bad guy is in power of the land. And so obviously there's a lot of people that aren't happy about that, and so I guess there's like a rebellion kind of rising up to try and take this power down. So this is kind of a story about that rebellion trying to, I guess, kind of create an army and like train towards this, and like it's that makes it sound so boring. It's not boring, but you're mostly following 2 characters, and it's kind of like a mentor-mentee kind of relationship, I guess, where this mentor has found this girl who ends up kind of having a lot of potential, and so he takes her under his wing, and he is basically trying to like train her and teach her how to cultivate and use all of this potential that she has. So without like spoiling anything, I feel like that's kind of the main storyline, but there is so much that happens in this book. Obviously it's a long book, and obviously it's a Brandon Sanderson book, so the world building is incredible, the magic system is incredible, and I need to continue the series. Next we have Redeeming 6. This is 100% one of those books that just tears your heart out and kind of puts it back together, but mostly just tears it out and like rips it to shreds, and then puts those shreds in a paper shredder so it just like shreds it even more, and then stamps on it with a boot. So do I recommend this book? Yes. If you don't know, this is the 4th book in the Boys of Tommen series, which is, I guess, a romance series, but it is so much more than a romance series. And it follows this group of teenagers who all just have a really rough life. The first 2 books, Binding and Keeping 13, follow Johnny and Shannon, and then the second 2 books, Saving and Redeeming 6, follow Joey and I want to say Aoife. I always get mixed up with the pronunciation of her name. My apologies. It's either Aoife or Aoife, but I feel like it's Aoife. And so I read Binding and Keeping 13 in 2023, and then I read Saving 6, Redeeming 6, and Taming 7 in 2024. And I think this is my favorite one out of the 3 that I read in 2024, but the whole series is like a 5-star series for me. It is absolutely incredible. Like I said, very, very heartbreaking. Check the trigger warnings of this series. Do not go into this if you are not in a great mental state, because it honestly like wrecked me. Like, it made me feel so sad for these kids that just go through like literal hell and back. Like, it is awful what they go through, but they also end up finding love, and they also end up finding hope, and they're so resilient, and even when it looks like they're not going to get back up again, they just do. And it's just a really beautiful story about how life can be so awful, but there can still be joy and love and happiness in life. And I feel like because you just see them go through so much trauma and so much sadness, you get so attached to them, so by the time there's anything happy going on, you are just so happy for them. I feel like it's very rare to feel so deeply about ink on paper, so when you do, it just feels very special. And this series is just one of those series. And again, like I said, I think this book is just my favorite one that I read in 2024. I do think Binding and Keeping 13 may be like my favorites overall, probably Keeping 13 specifically. Anyway, I just really love this series. I love these characters, and I cannot wait to continue the series as it progresses, because I just need to know all of these character stories so badly. Guys, we're officially in the top 5, and the book taking that number 5 spot is Ready or Not by Cara Bastone. And this may be crazy, but this is another unexpected pregnancy trope book. What the heck has gone on this year? Like, I don't know what has made me fall in love with this trope, and I don't think I am in love with this trope. Like, I think Out on a Limb and Ready or Not are kind of like anomalies, but they're both so good, and I just can't believe that 2 books with that trope have ended up in my top favorite books of the year. Crazy. The premise of Ready or Not actually sounds kind of similar to Out on a Limb, but I promise you, when you're reading it, whilst there are some similarities, it is a vastly different story, and it just feels different. Like, it doesn't feel repetitive at all. So Ready or Not is about this woman called Eve, and she ends up having a one-night stand with this guy at a bar, and she ends up falling pregnant, and that was just not her plan. Eve is very comfortable in the life that she is currently living. She has a comfortable job and a comfortable apartment and comfortable friendships. Is she in love with her life? Maybe not, but is she like fine with it? Yeah. And so this just obviously throws such a spanner in the works, because she is a single woman living in New York City, and now she is going to have to figure out how to also be a single mom, I guess, and support this child financially and emotionally by herself, potentially. And this is another one of those stories where I feel like, yes, it's a romance book, but it is so much more than that, and it's much more of like a women's fiction story as well as a romance. And whilst the romance was so fun and it had me giggling and kicking my feet, I feel like it was really beautiful to just watch Eve kind of figure out what she wanted from her life and kind of make things happen and just work out what her values were and what her priorities were, and I guess just not be walked all over as well, because I feel like she was kind of much more of a pushover at the beginning of this book compared to the end, which was just really nice to like watch that grow and develop throughout the story. Okay, the hood's coming off because I'm overstimulated. I'm not going to say much more about the actual romance side of things, because I think it's actually really fun for you to just like figure it out for yourself, but I will say it didn't go the direction I thought it was going to go, and the guy in this book is probably one of my favorite book boyfriends. Like, he is so sweet, and there's like one scene that just lives rent-free in my mind. Also, I love how like witty this book is. Like, there's a lot of banter, a lot of quick wit, very like Lorelai Gilmore coded in my opinion, so I cannot recommend this book enough. I will say though, this really documents her pregnancy, so I know some people are not interested in reading about like pregnancy. If you don't want to read about that, don't read this book, because that is quite a large part of it, but I personally really enjoyed it, so love this book. Coming in 4th place is Emily Wilde's Map of the Other Lands. This I love this book. I love this series. I'm so excited for the third book coming out very, very soon. This is a cozy fantasy trilogy that is just like everything I could personally wish for. Like, I think if I were to request a fantasy book, like this actually would be my dream fantasy book, or like dream fantasy series. This book is technically the second book in the series, but the first one is also a 5-star read for me, and I think also made it into my top 10 of 2023, I want to say. I'll try and link that down below as well if you're interested. I would describe this series as like light academia, cozy fantasy, but in the first book in this series, you are following Emily Wilde as she tries to complete her Encyclopedia of Fairy. And it's kind of written in a diary format, like she's writing diary entries about what she's doing each day, and she has gone out into this part of the world that she's never been to before to study the folk of the land. Some days are very mundane and some days are a lot more interesting. The other thing about Emily Wilde is that she is, I would argue, a bit neurospicy coded. She obviously has her special interests, which are fairies and writing this encyclopedia. She loves academia, but she also does struggle in social situations to understand what is expected of her or kind of gather those social cues, and that ends up leading to some issues and some conflict, I guess. Her academic rival, or like arch nemesis, turns up and we see a very unlikely relationship start to build. But something that I really love about this series is that Wendell is kind of the opposite of Emily in many ways. So he is very social and very outgoing, and also not a hard worker at all. Could not care less about the actual kind of academia side of things, apart from getting the credit of doing the academic research. So they really are the opposites of each other in many ways, but they kind of balance each other out very well, and they end up as a very good team. So I'm very excited to read the third book and see what kind of adventures Wendell and Emily will go on. But I just love those characters with my whole heart. They just make me giggle so much. I know that series is not for everyone, but I just love it. Next, funny story. You were third on the pyramid. You were third overall high score. I don't think anyone's gonna be shocked this made it to the list. Obviously, she's one of my top favorite authors, and this was her release for 2024. If you haven't read this already, like, I don't know what else I have to say. The premise of this book is kind of crazy. We're following Daphne, who was in a really serious long-term relationship, and her partner goes away for a trip. He comes back. He says, hey, some things have happened. I don't want to be with you anymore. I want to be with someone else. It's even crazier when you read it and like you find out all the details. And so you need to move out. And so now Daphne has to go move out. And so she ends up moving in with this guy called Miles, who, again, when you read it, you'll understand this a bit better, but he's kind of the only person that would understand the situation. But he is also just someone that she would never see herself spending time with if this was not the situation, if that makes sense. Like, he is just completely opposite from her in every way, but they end up building a really beautiful friendship and eventually catch feelings. But again, there's just so much more to it than that. Also, Daphne is a librarian, and I think that was one of my favorite elements of the book and of the story, like watching her just have this job that she really loved and was so passionate about. It was so cute. Moving on to number 2, we have Just for the Summer by Abby Jimenez. This was so good. I love Abby Jimenez. I've read every book she's released. I've been reading her books since 2021, I think. And she just continues to impress me year after year, release after release. Every time she releases a new book, it's somehow better than the last. I can't choose if this is my favorite or yours truly is my favorite, because yours truly was so special to me, and I hold that so closely in my heart in terms of like relatability. But I just loved this story so much. This is about two people who both think they are cursed, and they say this because they both tend to date people, and then once they break up with that person will go on to find the love of their life. Whoever they date next, they'll end up being, you know, their future husband or wife or whatever. And they are both thinking this way, and then they both come across each other on social media, and they're like, wait a second, maybe we could cancel out this curse. If we are both dealing with this individually, maybe if we fake date each other and then fake break up, we will then go on to meet the love of our lives. Which is just like such a fun premise. I don't know how she was able to come up with that, but I guess at the core of it, it's just like a fake dating story. But again, it is so much more than that. I feel like Abby Jimenez is the queen of creating rom-coms that have incredible depth to them and have so much more going on to them. There's a lot of family dynamics in this book, which I found really, really interesting. And Justin, our main love interest, he was just incredible. He was the best. I loved him so much, and the things he was willing to do for his family and then also for Emma was just really beautiful to watch. So it's just so good. People ask me all the time if you should read Abby Jimenez's books in order, and if you are planning to read all of them, then yeah, like read them in order. Read Part of Your World and then Yours Truly and then Just for the Summer. But I hesitate to say that because I'm like, if you are only gonna pick up one book from Abby Jimenez, I would rather you pick up Yours Truly or Just for the Summer. Will you miss out a tiny bit on a bit of like the lore? Yes. And would your reading experience be a little bit better if you started and read them in order? Probably yes, but like, will you miss out on a lot? Like, no. Like, if you are really desperate just to read Just for the Summer or just to read Yours Truly, pick them up. Like, if that's gonna get you to read the books, just do it. I don't think it's like absolutely vital. I do think it is helpful and it's slightly better to read them in order, but if my friends are asking me what my favorite is, I'm gonna say Yours Truly or Just for the Summer. So do with that what you will. I know that's not a very helpful answer, but loved this book, loved these characters, loved this story. Second favorite book of the year. I feel like I should put my hood back on for the final book. Out of the 152 books that I read last year, this was number one, and I don't think anyone will be surprised. Magnolia Parks Into the Dark by Jessa Hastings. Obviously. Duh. If this is a shock to you, you must be new here. And it's also just so crazy to me that I read my favorite book of the year in January, February, either way, at the very beginning of the year. Like, this is my favorite book of 2024 and I read it at the beginning of the year. Like, that is crazy. This is the 5th book in the Magnolia Parks universe, but it's technically like the 3rd book in the Magnolia Parks side of the series. And this is also the conclusion to the Magnolia Parks side of the series. There's still gonna be more books in this universe and in this series, but this is our last Magnolia Parks book, and that is really sad if I think about it too much, so I'm not gonna think about it too much, but I love this series with my entire heart and soul. It feels like it was written for me, not because I can relate to literally a single thing in these books, but just because I love these characters so deeply, which is kind of crazy because they're so problematic and they have so many issues and so much trauma, but for some reason, despite their continuous mistakes and frustrating decisions, I just adore them and I feel like they are my best friends. If you don't know what the Magnolia Parks series is about, you are basically just following a group of incredibly rich young adults who are part of the elite London society, I guess. It's very much like Gossip Girl, but set in London. All of the kids are kind of like nepo babies, like they come from really, really wealthy families, but you just kind of follow them along their lives while they kind of just bop around London and the world, actually. Just living the high life. But there is so much drama. Even Jessa Hastings herself has said it's not like technically a romance series. I would describe it as more of just like a drama series, I guess, or like in the drama category, if that is even a category. But whilst there is a lot of romance in it, it's not really one of those situations where you're like, oh my gosh, I wish I had a love like theirs, because it's like so messy and problematic and they are really awful to each other, but they do love each other so deeply. I don't even know. I'm really not selling this series at all, but I love it. And I don't know if I'll ever love a series more than I love this series. And I don't even know why. I feel like, honestly, the writing and the characters, I guess, but the writing, I don't know why, but it just, I say this a lot, but it scratches an itch in my brain. It just feels like something else. Like, I've just never experienced writing like Jessa Hastings' writing. It just flows through my brain. My brain is like a sponge ready to like soak it all up. I just love the way that she writes. And what's even crazier is, like, even after I already had this list like locked in, I was looking back at my previous years of filming this video and I realized that my favorite book in 2022 was Magnolia Parks, my favorite book in 2023 was Daisy Hates a Great Undoing, and now my favorite book in 2024 is Magnolia Parks Into the Dark. So Jessa Hastings has won my personal favorite book of the year 3 years running, which is absolutely insane. And I'm really nervous because I don't know if it's going to happen in 2025. We do not have the next release date of the next book coming in this series, and I don't think Jessa has even started writing it yet, as far as I'm aware. I know she knows exactly what she's going to write, but I don't think she's actually like locked in and started writing the book yet. But we do have another release from her, like a different series, a totally different world, totally different characters. We have a new book coming from her, I think in April this year, and I'm very intrigued to see how I feel about that book, because her other release for a new series, Never, definitely wasn't like a top favorite of mine. I actually still did enjoy it, and I feel like a lot of people like hated it. I actually did really enjoy it, but it wasn't like a top favorite of mine. So I'm very intrigued, and I'm so glad that we do have a release coming from her this year. I don't know what I would do without it, but for now, let's just appreciate what she did give us, which was Into the Dark, which was absolutely Chef's Kiss perfection. Adored this, loved this, ate up every single word. Incredible. But those are my top 13 favorite books from 2024. Honestly, all of these books make me so happy, and it's just so fun to talk about books that you absolutely love. Like, I swear I could talk for hours about books that I love, and it's just so fun to have a whole video where I can just like geek out about my favorite books. Thank you guys so much for watching. I would love to know what your favorite book of 2024 was. Please let me know, because if I haven't read it, I need to. But I love you guys so much, and I guess I'll see you guys in my next video very soon. I can't reach my face. Goodbye. Oh, I cannot wait to take this off. Thank goodness.